During this year of the pandemic, despite all the sadness, there have been moments that have demonstrated the triumph of the human spirit. And many of them involved patients who came through the ordeal and the gratitude that they showed to the health workers who saved them. One such patient spent weeks in the ICU of the Cleveland Clinic, where caregivers frequently communicated with him by writing on the glass door in the isolation room. When he was finally discharged, the patient left a written message on that same window. Here's what it said. "This window has been the most impactful window of my life. On days when I watched you work hard to keep me and others alive, unable to thank you for the time that you poured into me. And although I will probably never get the chance to pour that same love and support into you, I want you to know that I think you're all rock stars. I've watched some of you had good nights and some had bad nights, but what was consistent every night was that you care for people. Today I leave this ICU a changed person, hopefully for the better, not only because of your medical healing and God's direction and guidance, but with the fact of knowing that there are such wonderful people dedicated to the care and concern of others. God bless each of you." I want to dedicate this sermon to the essential workers. What a strange term that is. Who is an essential worker, and what determines an essential service? I mean, this is a perfect time to discuss this. Kol Nidre, after all, is the most essential service of the year. In ancient Israel, there was no more essential worker than the high priest, the Kohen Gadol. And on Yom Kippur, only he could utter that ineffable divine name and effect the spiritual cleansing of the people. Without him, they couldn't be absolved of their sins. So the idea of essential workers and essential services goes back a long way. Many might recall that during the Holocaust, the Schindler's List story, Oskar Schindler employed 1,700 workers at his factory in Krakow, and in order to protect the Jewish ones from SS deportation, he added an armaments manufacture division. He didn't need to do it. He added that division solely so that these workers would be classified as essential workers to the war effort. This year, 42 states issued some sort of guidance which sectors and industries would be considered essential, meaning who could leave their homes during the pandemic while the closures were going on. And these lists ranged widely, from the obvious, police, firefighters, doctors, teachers, to the less obvious, like in Florida, professional wrestlers. The Department of Homeland Security issued guidance that indicated that essential status should involve people who work in sectors like energy, agriculture, critical retail, construction, trades, transportation, social service organizations, including religious institutions. In some cases, workers were forced to put themselves at great risk with little protection. Many meatpacking factories, for example, became super spreaders for the virus. You know, the next time you eat, it's important to ask whether it was just the chicken who gave her life to your dining pleasure, or maybe also the worker who processed it. So here's to the essential ones, the courageous ones, the ones whom we often overlook and forget to thank, who literally put their lives on the line so we could put food on our tables, or educate our kids, or fix our downed power lines, or ride our buses, or flush our toilets. Meet Jester. Now, I don't really know a lot about him, and we've never personally met. I do know that his name is not really Jester, but he's just a funny guy who likes to bring smiles into the world. I also know that he tweets at JustMeTurtle. I know that he has over 23,000 Twitter followers, and I know that he changed my life. I first discovered Jester on Twitter last March as we were being pummeled by the first wave of the coronavirus. Our region was burning up with fever. The hospitals were overflowing. You might recall, at that time, I was sending out nearly daily messages to the congregation from the rabbi's bunker, hoping to inspire each of us to stay safe by staying indoors, but at the same time affirming that despite our isolation, we were all connected in deep spiritual ways. Most of us needed to stay inside. And I explained then that the Talmud makes it clear that even God wants us to stay indoors during a pandemic, stating, "If there is plague in the city, gather your feet," meaning limit the time you spend out of the house, as is stated in the verse, "And none of you shall go out of the opening of his house until the morning." So says the Talmud. The Tractate Avot says we shouldn't separate from the community, but there are times such as these when the act of separation from the community is the most community-affirming thing we can do. And we found remarkable ways to create community online where it was safe from inside our homes. But like so many of you, I felt isolated and lonely and afraid. Going to Stop and Shop. Remember the first time you went out to the supermarket? It was like entering a war zone with potential landmines on every shelf. And then back home, I was even afraid to pick up my newspaper without washing my hands. I don't know about you, but I sang Happy Birthday so often that at last count, I think I'm 250 years old. Then I found Jester. Jester is a sanitation worker. Sanitation workers really are, in every sense, essential workers, holding society together without much recognition. At a time when so many people were home all day, the amount of trash went way up. While at the same time, the number of sanitation workers decreased because they were all getting sick. And they had to work 17, 18 days straight without a day off. Think of all those paper towels that we use to sanitize our doorknobs. We all put them in the trash. And imagine how that adds up, how much COVID there was churning around in those trucks with each day's pickup. So their bodies started to break down. Sanitation workers are barely noticed in the best of times, as sadly, people tend to avoid them, as you would say, like the plague. By the way, when we think about avoiding things like the plague, I try to figure out, where did that expression come from? It came from, coincidentally, St. Jerome, a religious figure, early 4th century. He originated it, but in an interesting context. He wrote, "Avoid as you would the plague a clergyman who is also a man of business." Very good advice. Which prompts the question, who's more essential, a hard-working sanitation worker or a profit margin-obsessed pastor? All right, let's park that idea for a moment and go back to our story. So this was mid-March. We were all scared to death. And then I saw this thread on Twitter by Jester, and there were 3 amazing tweets. I'll read them to you. Pop them up on your screen. First, "I'm a garbage man. I can't work from home, and my job is an essential city service that must get done. It's a tough job, from getting up pre-dawn to the physical toll it takes on my body, to the monotonous nature of the job. At times, it's hard to keep on going." Second tweet, Right now, though, I'm feeling an extra sense of pride and purpose as I do my work. I see the people, my people of my city, peeking out their windows at me. They're scared. We're scared. Scared but resilient. Us garbage men are going to keep collecting the garbage. Doctors and nurses going to keep doctoring and nursing. It's going to be okay. We're going to make it be okay. I love my city. I love my country. I love my planet Earth. Be good to each other, and we'll get through this. Just the image of this garbage collector driving around in the city and looking in the windows and seeing the eyes peep out at him from those windows and looking back and seeing how terrified everyone is and realizing that he had a message to share. It turns out Jester's name is really Aaron Meyer, and he works the streets of San Francisco. Hope his truck has really good brakes. His tweets gained about 500,000 likes. People couldn't get enough of his story. In fact, he shared it on Good Morning America. At a time when I was reaching the depths of despair, this Twitter thread from Aaron Meyer hit me like an answered prayer, and I cried. I cried because he made the most profound statement that he could possibly make, that could possibly be made, about how, even through our separation, we are inexorably linked. Just as my garbage rests in eternal harmony next to yours in some landfill somewhere, just as my toilet paper finds peace next to yours, so are we all united, body and spirit. And he was literally putting his life on the line for people like me. His tweet made me understand that all this distancing ultimately is bringing us closer together. All over the world, we share the same destiny, the same fears, the same desire to love our neighbor as ourselves. Why did God want us to separate? Perhaps to help us understand that ultimately the walls we hide behind, however necessary, are illusory. There's no real place where I end and you begin. Our fates are literally in the hands, washed and unwashed, of millions of people whom we will never meet. Our bodies, not just our souls, have become inseparable. Like the famous quote of Dr. Martin Luther King from Birmingham jail, we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. So this moved me so much that the next week when I took out my trash, I wrote, "Thank you," on the lid to hail an unseen, underappreciated hero here in Stamford, whoever hauls away my trash. The Talmud tells a story of Rav Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, who became ill and was on the verge of death. He recovered, and his father asked him, you were hovering between life and death there. What did you see? What did you see while you were near death? And he said, Olam hafuch ra'iti, an upside-down world. Those who are important and recognized in this world were low in that world, and those who are unimportant in this world are highly regarded there. Rabbi Yehoshua then says, no, bubala, whatever the Aramaic equivalent of bubala is. No, it's not an upside-down world at all that you saw. Olam barur ra'ita, a world of clarity you have seen. A world turned upside down turns out to be the world as it should be. This is what happens when those so commonly seen as being the lowest of the low suddenly change places with those with the greatest status. The rabbi said of the Torah, hafochba, turn it and turn it. Keep looking at it from different angles. Turn it over and over again. We should do the same with life. It's sort of ironic that the last time we were together in our sanctuary for a celebration was Purim, back in March, considered the holiday when the world turns upside down, where the servants become rulers and the powerful are brought low, and everyone wears masks of all things to confuse matters. Our tradition says of Purim, nahafochu, reverse it. All is reversed. The world turns upside down. The coronavirus turned our world upside down into a place where we recognized at long last who is truly essential and who is not. And for those of us who work in religious institutions, now there's no question that we deliver essential services. And our building does not need to be open for that to be the case. I mean, we're proving that at this very moment. But this has been a humbling year for religious institutions. Those religious institutions, like ours, with integrity, have understood that our most essential service, our most essential purpose, is to save lives and to enhance lives. And we were alerted right at the beginning of the crisis that there are special dangers that religious institutions have to confront. When a church in Skagit County, Washington, remember the first state that really was affected was Washington State, and they had a choral rehearsal. And at that church choir rehearsal, 53 members became infected. And there was something that we learned about a lot of people praying together that was getting them sick. But despite this, there are some clergy who have led their congregations astray by flaunting protocols and reopening prematurely, sometimes even breaking the law, and encouraging their congregants to shun masks and spacing when it is common knowledge that crowded church services can be super-spreading events. Like that Tampa, Florida pastor who was arrested in April for defying authorities by holding services for hundreds of parishioners, or the pastor in San Antonio who later apologized for encouraging hugging at his church, resulting in 50 cases of the coronavirus, or the Louisiana pastor who was arrested for defying stay-at-home orders after holding live services for hundreds of people, or the church in Seoul, South Korea, not just here in America, that flaunted regulations was later found to be linked to more than 5,200 cases. And it's a Jewish problem, too, like that super-spreader Hasidic funeral in Brooklyn that drew 2,500 people. And then there was Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky of the Haredi community of Beitar Elite in Israel, who said that yeshiva students should stop being screened because it could lead to, quote, a mass loss of Torah study. Really? Isn't that the Torah that they're studying? That's talking about keeping people alive? And he wanted to keep his enrollment up, so he said there shouldn't be screening? Or that pastor in Maine who, after officiating at a super-spreader wedding, knowingly spread it to his congregation, defiantly mocking state and CDC guidelines, stating that God wants him to expose his people to disease. He said, I want the people of God to enjoy liberty. Give me liberty or give me breath. Actually, the God I pray to prefers parishioners who aren't dead. Or the thousands who attended a California megachurch, the Grace Community Church. Pastor John MacArthur defied a state order, and nearly 7,000 people showed up. We don't orchestrate this, MacArthur said. This is a church. We don't ask people to make a reservation to come to church. Well, maybe they should. We do for our non-service events that we've been holding in person. We open the doors, he added, because that's what we are. We're a church. We're going to trust those people to make adult decisions about the reality of their physical and spiritual health and how that balance works for each one of them. Nobody's forcing anything. They're here because they want to be here. They clearly didn't read that verse from the Talmud. If there is a plague in the city, gather your feet and stay home. That's what God wants, I think. Not to get sick and die. Not to be foolishly careless. And I admit it's very hard to stay apart. Very hard. And it's excruciating for clergy to have to enforce it. Distancing is a challenge. It just feels unnatural. It doesn't feel right. You know, there's a mohel in St. Louis who, because of the need to distance, people were wondering, how do you do a bris during a pandemic? How do you do a bris? Well, he played multiple roles. That's a way to do it. He was both the mohel and the sandek. Serious, this actually happened. He both held the baby on his lap and did the cutting. It is not easy to do religion during a pandemic. As for the baby, she's doing just fine. I'm kidding. So who is an essential worker? Well, even those pastors who are acting irresponsibly are, unfortunately, still essential. It's just that they're essentially dangerous. But for each of the religious leaders that I mentioned, there are hundreds who are acting responsibly, both in working with their lay leaders to determine when to relax distancing restrictions and when to enforce them. We're all sending messages through our words and deeds, messages that will either sustain life and lift the spirit or crush it and kill, literally kill. If we encourage people to take this thing lightly, we're literally killing people. The Talmud says life and death are in the power of the tongue. Never before has that been more true, whether we are clergy or sanitation professionals. And I must emphasize that our opening committee has been acting with great care and respect for science and the potency of this disease. I have only one qualm, and that's with the name. Why call it an opening committee? We never closed. How about some more essential workers? How about Neil Jane, a high school student in Portland, Oregon, who shops and delivers groceries to immunocompromised senior citizens so they don't have to. The service began as a mission that started when he and his grandmother he wanted to help her because she had asthma. His parents have been driving him around, and he's sort of like franchised this thing as a website, expanded the effort to other communities, delivering groceries. We've seen people do that in our community too, with our congregants. Talk about essential. Storyteller Eden Wafsi looked at a grocery store clerk in Chicago who was risking life and limb to make sure that we all have yellow tomatoes and peppers. And she asked her about it. The woman said, "I'm not really anybody special. I'm just doing my job." And Wafsi commented, "It's become abundantly clear that those who grow and harvest and pack and ship and stock and deliver and clean and carry and then do it again and again and again and again are not only important, but the foundation, the scaffolding, the beams, the walls, the warp and woof of our society. There are more famous people, more recognized, and certainly more remunerated people, but without the people who have to leave their houses to go to work, none of that would matter. Maybe it will always be thus, that those who serve and care for and clean and deliver will do so with graciousness and a smile, but it doesn't always have to be that our society takes so many people for granted whom we so clearly depend on. I'm no one special, this woman said. I'm no one special, and she's wrong. And this year we realized it, perhaps for the first time. Hafoch, hafochu. Turn it around. Have you thanked your mail carrier lately? I have. Even when he delivers a Newsweek from 1988, you got to thank him. You know, as long as the ballot he delivers doesn't say Dukakis versus Bush, we're okay. Thank your supermarket bagger, like Elaine Roberts, the 35-year-old bagger at Houston Supermarket with autism, who got sick and ended up on a ventilator because her governor and her store owner refused to mandate masks. She lives with her parents, and they were hospitalized too. Thank your teachers, or your child's teachers. Many of them are taking extraordinary risks because they love their students and they love what they do. Thank the traffic cop who waves you through some tree removal work on Westover Road. And yes, the Eversource worker who's removing the tree to get your power running. Or the librarian who helps set you up with Wi-Fi because the power is out at your home. Or the newspaper deliverer who is out there every day performing a vital service. Don't get mad. Don't scream at the clerk at Target who asked you to wear a mask. Don't ask to see the manager. Thank this cashier for reminding you about the policy and caring about your health. When it comes down to it, the big lesson we've learned this year is that everyone is an essential worker, including those currently out of work. We are all essential because your life depends on me and my life depends on you. About a month ago, I wrote to Aaron Mayer, that lighthearted sanitation worker who lifted me up and lifted up so many people last March. I thanked him for changing my life, and I asked him if he had any wisdom to share with all of you as we approach Yom Kippur. And he replied to my request almost instantly. Success hasn't spoiled him. He wrote back, "Hi, Rabbi. I'm glad that my words had the impact they did. I was kinda hoping that we'd be more unified as a country after I wrote them. It's unfortunate the way we've gone, but I'm still out there hauling the trash, keep putting one work boot in front of the other. I'm sure many are doing the same. If you want to share my words, that would be great. I don't really have much to add as far as a personal greeting. I've been at a loss for words lately." So I replied to him right away, "Don't give up. You've inspired us. Let others lift you." And so I ask, follow him. Follow him on Twitter. Tell him you heard about him on Yom Kippur. Tell him he made your rabbi cry. I want to dedicate this sermon to him and to Neil, the teenager who helps with the groceries, and to the post office people and people at the police station, people in the utility companies, the hairdressers, the pizza makers. Blessed be the cheese makers. Everyone. The gardeners, the plumbers, the veterinarians, the dog walkers. Everyone. The people with whom I work, who have been working from home, working from here, putting themselves on the line to bring special service to our community. And our first responders and our medical professionals, of course, who watched countless patients hovering between life and death and made sure that we knew what was really happening as we hid in our bunkers. Thank you to you all. And thanks to Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, who also hovered between life and death, and through that experience saw the possibility of a world turned upside down. Olam hafuch ra'iti. I saw an overturned world. Olam barur ra'ita. You saw the world with perfect clarity. He saw what is truly essential. Martin Luther King wrote, "If it falls your lot to be a street sweeper, sweep streets like Michelangelo painted pictures. Sweep streets like Beethoven composed music. Sweep streets like Shakespeare wrote poetry. Sweep streets so well that all the hosts of heaven and earth will have to pause and say, 'Here lived a great street sweeper who swept his job well.' Here's to the essential ones who have touched our lives. And here's to the essential ones who hold the power of life and death over us all. And that means all of us. Amen.